Hello again, and welcome back. I am McSnazzi, and today we are back in City Skylines for another episode of our Grand Haven series. But before we get into this exciting and packed episode, please consider subscribing down below. It's completely free and it really does help out the channel. This week's episode, we are going to expand our suburb town of Cornet by quite a bit. We're going to add a lot of new roads, a little bit more neighborhood, another new neighborhood that's sort of this new development sort of place, a bunch of new shops, an office district, police station, town hall, and recycling center, as you're seeing on the screen now. So a lot happens in this episode. If you're not interested in watching all the time lapse, there's a timestamp below that will take you straight to the live playthrough where I go through the episode and what we did in it in a live commentated summary of the video. So if you're more interested in something like that, the timestamp is below. You can skip straight ahead to that. But for those that want to watch the time lapse, let's get started to what we're doing on screen. What you saw just a second ago is me putting a recycling center down over sort of by the highway. I thought that was a good place for it, but it's going to change a little bit when we get further in the episode. Right now we are placing a post office, which I love this new asset ever since they added it. It looks like a perfect US post office, and it's perfect for putting on our little main drag here. I'm sort of it was a little tough trying to figure out what exactly I wanted to put on this main drag here. Since it is more of a suburban town, not super high dense, we don't want it to be a ton of just commercial shops because there's not going to be a ton. In the commercial town, there's more of these suburban strip malls, and then there'll be like fast food joints and restaurants dotted here and there. So that's sort of the feel I'm going for here, and we're going to use the technique of pulling these sort of buildings and assets out from the road and putting parking lots in front of them for pretty much all of the builds today, because as I've been doing more research and more looking at Google Maps, Google Earth, all these suburban towns in the US that we see, at least the ones I'm basing this off of, you're gonna have a parking lot in front of pretty much every building. So a lot of the aerial view is a lot of parking lots, a lot of neighborhoods, and just a lot of trees and dead space. So that's pretty much what we're going for here. Although this is sort of a area that is close to like a downtown big city, it's going to be a little more dense than necessarily any other town or suburban town. And sort of the town builds that we're going to make further on in the series, when we make like a little mountain town, I think I'm going to make a little town along a lake too, stuff like that. They're a little more spread out and sparse because land is not so much of a hot commodity in places like this, places like that, and more for places like this where you're a suburban town pretty close to a major hub, major downtown big city. It's going to be a lot more dense. So that's sort of what I'm going for here. It is a little bit more wooded, but that's sort of the feel I want to go for the whole series. Even the big dense downtown that we're going to do is not going to be super duper huge. It's not going to be super duper dense. There's not going to be like 50 skyscrapers. There might be 4 or 5, I'm thinking, but we'll get more to that when we accomplish that. But that's sort of the view I want to go for. A little more close to nature, a little more wooded, lots of trees. I like putting lots of trees as detail. I think it looks nice, and I'm just a fan of that in general. But here we're going to move to putting in a car dealership, something I also saw a lot in my research on Google Earth, and a lot of these towns have a ton of car dealerships along these main drags. They'll have probably 2 or 3, but I mean, that's a lot. Like, they take up a lot of space, and I think it's a realistic thing to put into this this sort of main drag in front of the town right here. And it was really fun to make. It was getting a little bit creative with it. We're gonna sandwich together a car dealership looking building with a just regular building that has garages in order to make it look like it's got like a little bit of a service center in it and stuff like that. We're going to surround it with trees, and we're going to move on to the next build in this episode, which is going to be this little bowling alley and sort of an IHOP, or it's called like pancakes, exclamation point. I don't know. It's a vanilla asset, a couple vanilla assets. I thought the bowling alley was going to be a bank when I first put it down, but then when I put it down, the signage showed up and it says bowling alley. So we're just going to roll with it. It's fine. I was hoping to put a bank. That seems like a realistic common thing that I am also seeing and also want to put in. I wonder if there is an asset. I'm sure there is, but I have to go digging a little more into the commercial assets for the vanilla game here, because in this episode we don't get back to doing any more commercial until the very end, and I didn't go looking for a bank in that. So here we're going to place down a recycling center, and we're going to extend that a little bit later. Like I said before, we downsize from the big one into the smaller size because the big one just looked way too big. This looks a lot better and a lot better sized, and looks a little more realistic, so we're going to go with that. Now what we're doing here is we're sort of doing a new development, in quotations, sort of neighborhood. And I've been seeing this in a lot of the Google Earth that I've been looking at, is there's a lot of these new neighborhoods, or like newly developed neighborhoods that aren't like super old or as old as a town, that'll have these like townhouse condos or townhouse apartments sort of close together, really tight in these small spaces, just to shove as many people as possible into a small area. Because it's right by the big city, it makes sense to have some of these like that. And we're going to add a few details to make it look even more like it's sort of a new development. In a second, we're going to make the ground look a little more dirty than just plain grass that's set down, so it looks like it's a little more like recently developed, like they're still trying to grow grass on it and things like that. So we'll get back to that shortly, but before we do that, and I apologize for all the jumping around this video, I went through a lot of different phases in this episode and jumped around a bunch, putting things everywhere, expanding this town. But for now, we're going to be putting down a town hall for the town of Cornet. It's pretty simple, just it's the tax office sort of vanilla asset that's in the monument section in your game, and I sort of add some parking lots around it and some trees, and it looks nice. And we'll do a little bit more to that. I think we'll add a park around there because it just seems like that's something that would be by a town hall. So we're gonna probably end up doing something like that. But here we're going to be extending and sort of making this recycling center look a little bit more realistic. Most buildings aren't right up next to the road, especially like a recycling center like this. So we're gonna move it back from the road a little bit, build a little bit of a fence around it, a little bit of an area, put some trash in the back, put some parking lots up front, just to make it look a little more realistic and sort of fit the feel of the town in general. So as you can see, I'm sort of putting these utility buildings and like commercial and sort of a little bit of industrial buildings, kind of like this recycling center, right by some of these neighborhoods, like this new development. And I think it's a little more common in real life when you're thinking of realism in sort of this series, that some of these things are just kind of placed everywhere, especially in these smaller towns. It's just a bunch of residential neighborhoods, and then there's industry buildings and commercial buildings just shoved in here and there, just where they fit. And I think it's a little more that it's been made over time, and it just seems more organic to kind of dot them everywhere instead of having a set industry area, a set sort of shopping district, stuff like that. Things like that we can do in the downtown. It seems a little bit more, premeditated. People think about that more when they're zoning like a big downtown for a big city than they do necessarily when they're zoning, a little suburb town that's evolved over time, expanded from years and years, things like that. So here we're going to extend this neighborhood a little bit. Thought the houses were just a little too close together, and they really were. Even though these houses in these new developments are sort of pretty close together compared to your average neighborhood or your just average house in general, it makes more sense to have them a little, not as close as I had them. They were a little too close. Now it looks a little bit better. Now it's a little bigger. There's a few dead ends as well, and I'm putting these sort of smaller trees because it looks like it's been recently built. They sort of destroyed everything that was there and then planted a bunch of these trees, so they're not yet mature yet as the rest of the town. So it kind of symbolizes, that it's a new development and things like that. So just dot those everywhere. And in a lot of these places, there's not like a big fence in backyard for everyone. It's just like these small little townhouses. They'll have like a little playground in the middle for kiddos, but I think it just looks realistic how it is, and I like where it's put. It's right in this sort of office and industrial commercial district, just kind of shoved in there because there was space available to add more people. And I think that's something that they would do in real life nowadays, just to fit more people somewhere. and it would just make sense. So now we're going to jump around once again into the sort of first neighborhood we've built in this series in the last few episodes, and we're going to jump around again and put a little gas station down for a second, but we're going to jump around, put some more houses over here, and I wanted to sort of change up the road layout this way. I'm thinking we're going to get rid of that main drag a little bit. We're going to extend that some more, but I wanted to add sort of an offset grid. I think it looks really cool to have sort of dueling grids in a city, or in this little like town that we have here, and I think it, you know, just looks cool from above, looks less grid reliant and looks a little more natural. So mostly it's because I just like how it looks, and I kind of want to switch things up with you know, the layout and everything. So we'll see how it looks in future episodes. It could change, but I think we'll sort of keep that feel of the dueling grids, where there's like this main grid that the city was first built on, and then like a new grid from like another neighboring city that over time they've sort of formed into this one big city, or not big city, bigger town from like two small towns in history. Just sort of building a little bit of a backstory for the area really helps add to, you know, the realism and thinking about how to build these things so it looks more realistic in the end. So here we're just going to add some more houses. We're going to add a dead end because it's getting right up next to the highway, and we don't really need it to go over the highway. It's just a small little residential street. And we're just going to fill in these little places with houses for now, and that neighborhood's probably going to end right where it is right now. I'm going to add a few more houses to fill in the rest of the areas, but for the most part it's going to end there, and then we're going to do some other things on the other side where we put that new grid. So now we're getting sort of almost done with the time lapse of this episode. We're going to do a couple more things in this small block right here to sort of finish off this area so we can move on from it in the next episode. What we're going to do right now is add a sort of little office block here. I thought it was a little realistic to have this sort of dotted in somewhere right behind the police station and behind that main drag. So we're going to add a few office buildings. I just sort of connected them together using Move It, sort of the same models, in order to make a bigger structure, because I want these sort of smaller office buildings, because a lot of the vanilla asset office buildings are like big skyscrapers, or, you know, tall, pretty like 4 or 5 story buildings. So I wanted to use these smaller models and then sort of add them together with Move It in order to make sort of a big sort of little office block. So it just looks better that way, and it's sort of the feel I wanted to go with. And of course we're going to use the same parking lot trick that we've been using the whole time, moving the buildings back and then putting the parking lot sort of facing the street. And I'm really happy with how all this area turned out over here, sort of that we've extended this way. I'm just super happy. I think it looks really realistic from above, and that's really the feel I want to go with. I know I say that a lot in these time lapses when I'm commentating them, but that's really the drive behind what I want to build. I want to build something that looks nice, but I also want it to have its quirks and look like it's something you could just take a picture of and put next to some picture on Google Maps, and, you know, not know which one is the game versus realism based off of how it looks, you know, layout wise and where things are. Not necessarily that the game doesn't look game-ish, because it does look a little cartoony at times, but I think we're stepping a little bit more into realism, and you can honestly take a screenshot somewhere in this city and it would probably look like an actual picture if you did a little bit of photo editing stuff, and that's what I want to go for. That's what really drives me to build in this game, and you know I like doing that in Planet Zoo as well if you do watch my Planet Zoo series. And that's pretty much the gist of all this time lapse. We're going to jump into the real-time portion right now, and I'll see you guys in a second. Alright everybody, welcome back to the live portion of the episode, and I'm trying to keep this a little brief since the time up was a bit longer this time than it usually is. We did get a lot done, as you can see if you missed the time lapse. There is a lot of new stuff on the screen right now in the city, or the town that is, the suburban town of Cornet. And let's just jump into it and see what we did in this episode. Let's start sort of on the main drag here. So you get off the highway, and what we've done is we've added in this car dealership right here. And I didn't go and add a bunch of cars to the back. I added parking lots, so I'm sure that'll fill up as more people and the population grows in the city as well. Really happy with how this turned out. Looks very natural, very realistic as well. Perfect thing to go along this main drag. Right next to it, we're going to have a post office that was also added in this episode. I added some cars in the back to sort of look like post trucks, but they don't really look like it, but it works out anyway, and I'm happy with the results for that. We have a little bit of a bowling alley and a pancake sort of more commercial area to add to the already busy main strip of this small suburban town. Over here we have the new town hall, which is the tax office vanilla building in the game if you're looking for it. It's under the monument section. It works perfectly for a little town hall, so that's what we end up doing here. Also, the police station, this asset is going to be added to the collection before this video goes live, so you can check it out in the description below. It's a little different than the vanilla police station. I think it may be a little too big, but it's alright, it'll work for now. I'm happy with it. We'll do something a little different when we build the downtown. Over this way, this is all brand new as well. We have a little bit of an office strip with some office buildings here. We have an office complex here with a couple offices, big parking lot, and some more commercial strip mall buildings here with a sort of Denny's or Penny's, as you'd like to say it, restaurant right here across the street from the brand new recycling center we did as well in this episode. Added sort of a fenced in area for this. It's going to work as a trash sort of department. We didn't have that facility in the city yet. I think it's a good place to put it. And we got some trash in the back, little parking lot up front. One of the bigger things we did in this episode was build this sort of new development, in quotations, neighborhood here where the houses are all identical. They all are pretty close together, and it looks like it was pretty recently built as not all the grass has grown in. We sort of did that effect by adding the ore texture to the ground if you're curious on how that works. But just sort of one of the new developments, squeezing as many people as possible into a smaller area neighborhood. Probably costs a little bit less than an actual house would in the neighborhood over here, so you know, it's a little bit more of a budget thing next to some industry. Realistic in my mind. I think it looks great. The smaller trees, so it looks like they were recently planted after, you know, the development company ripped out all the trees that were here already and sort of started new with this little neighborhood. I think it looks great. Happy with the results. And the road layout could change around it, but I don't know if it will. So over here I did this off camera, a little bit of a lumber store industry building. I think I'm going to add probably another one next to it, maybe one here as well. And along here, maybe some shops or smaller industry out of the way stuff. Maybe some houses as well. Not quite sure over there, but I think this area over here looks great, and we've sort of finished it off, capped it off in this episode, and I'm happy with the results. So off camera, I added this little water tower. I think we'll add some more houses around here. It's just something I liked, something, you know, I think you see in suburban towns more than you see anywhere else. So I think it was a nice aspect to add. We had some more houses this way, extend the road out next to the school, so it's more of a dead end, and just some more houses and neighborhood. And that's pretty much it, along with sort of editing the grid here, but we'll get to that in a future episode when we decide to do something with that. But I hope you guys did enjoy the build. I had a lot of fun building each one of these little individual builds in this episode, along with the big neighborhood, sort of fleshing out this area, extending the town of Cornet, so we're getting pretty big. I wanted to do a lot in this episode, and I think we did accomplish that. So I'm really happy with the results here. I hope you guys did enjoy it yourselves. If you did, please leave a like down in the comment section below. Leave a comment as well. Please subscribe if you aren't already. It really does help out the channel, and it's completely free. You can change your mind at any point and unsubscribe as well. And I'll see you guys in the next episode of Grand Haven. And until next time, I'm McSnazzi, and I'll see you guys in the next one.